You have so many ways to add depth to your fantasy world, and one of them is through linguistics. If you feel like your story is shallow or leaves something to be desired, this might be just what you need. So, what is linguistics? It's the scientific study of languages. It involves the sounds, the structure, the words, among other things. But how does this apply to your fantasy story? Well, your characters are from somewhere, a kingdom, a country, whatever other kind of place that you might have, like a tribe or whatnot. They have a history, they have a culture, an ethnicity. One of the best ways to make them feel more real is to give them an actual language. Now, that sounds like a tall order, but I'm not saying you need to make up tens of thousands of words. I'm not saying you need to study dozens of verb conjugations. I'm not even saying you need to know what a verb is. So how do you do it? The first thing I would do, especially if you're not very experienced in this realm, is find a language you like the sounds of. Get a general feel of whatever feels right. Do you want words to be longer or shorter on average? What is the word order? In real life, there's 3 general ways to go. For example, in English, you would say, I go to the store. In another language, you would say, I to the store go. And in other languages, you would say, go I to the store. That is subject, verb, object, verb, and verb, subject, object, respectively. You don't even need to know those terms, right? Just think about that general word order. I go to the store. I to the store go. Go I to the store. You don't need to get caught up in all the nomenclature. To give a real life example of the second option, I to the store go, it would be Japanese. They would say mise ni iku, store to go. Notice how in Japanese they don't use the word the. They don't even use the word I in this scenario. You can. It would go at the start of the sentence. Ore wa mise ni iku. There still isn't the in that sentence. They don't use things like the, a, and they tend to not use pronouns, words like I, you, he, or she, because they tend to like to let context sort of dictate what that word is. If you say I too much, it sounds quite self-centered. If you say you, they find it to be very direct and rude. In a scenario where they can't avoid saying you, they would actually just say the person's name, followed by like san or chan or sama, depending on the circumstances. Notice how even that tiny bit of a Japanese lesson gives you a real and a pretty deep insight into what Japanese culture is, and it even makes it feel like Japan is a real place where people actually live. That's what an author does when they sprinkle in even a tiny bit of language or linguistics. Now, with a language, if you're to try putting one in your fantasy story, you can use pronouns, words like I, he, she, he, or you can omit them. You can use articles, they're called, words like the, a as in a sweater, or an as in an apple. But you can also cut out those articles, the, a, an. You don't necessarily need them. You can order your words in different ways. There's a lot of flexibility. So words, specifically verbs, those are the action words like I run, I swim, they tend to change depending on who we're talking about or in other circumstances. Not always, but most of the time there will be some form of change depending on the circumstance. Let's look into this. In Italian, the word for eat is mangiare. I eat, io mangio. You eat, tu mangi, and they eat, loro mangiano. Let's compare this to Japanese, where the word for eat is taberu. I eat would be ore taberu. You eat would be anata taberu. And he eats would be kare taberu. And they eat would be kare da taberu. You just add da on top of the word kare. So it's kind of like saying he and then adding an S, except they add ra. They don't pronounce the R like that, though. It's a da. Now notice how taberu doesn't change at all in this context. Japanese in a lot of ways is a more bare bones language, but in other ways it gets a lot more complex and nuanced. You don't necessarily have to go that in depth with your fantasy story, though. You can just add in some touches here and there, and it goes a long way. You can get the same impact with just a few words, phrases, sentences, as long as they are coherent and have a consistent identity. It really does add a lot more depth. Another thing to consider is that languages change over time. For example, a very famous example, Latin, the language that the Roman Empire spoke, split into Italian, Spanish, and French. Italian and Spanish stayed pretty similar in the grand scheme of things, but they do have differences that show their unique history as well as their shared history. For example, in Italian, the word for life is vita, with a T, vita. In Spanish, it's vida with a D. In Italian, the word for chain is catena, and the Spanish word for chain is cadena with a D. Linguistically speaking, D and T are considered the same sound pretty much. It's just a question of whether you use your voice or not, right? T, D. If you do that right now, you'll see that your tongue and your mouth do the same thing. It's just like S and Z. S, Z, K and G, K, G, same sound, just a question of whether you use your voice. CH, ch, and J, j, they're also the same. It's just a question of whether you use your voice. Ch, j. It's just a matter of, at some point, basically in this particular instance, the Spanish decided they like to use their voice more when they make that noise. They prefer the d instead of the t in a lot of scenarios. And probably not all of them. I don't actually speak Spanish. I'm not going to speak for the whole language, of course. In Italian, people say I like by saying mi piace. That basically means to me, something is pleasing. But if you really want to really stress that it's to me, you could say a me piace. Now that really, that's like putting some emphasis in it, right? Like mi piace and then whatever thing it is that you like, or a me piace, and then whatever the exact same thing is that you like. Now the Spanish, they actually do the opposite. Their standard for something to me would be me. And then they don't use piace, they use gustar for like. So it would be me gusta if I like something. To my understanding, again, I don't speak Spanish, but to my understanding, if you really want to specify something is pleasing to you, you could also say a mi gusta. Notice in Italian, me is to me, a me is to me. In Spanish, just me is to me, and then a mi is also to meet. They just happen to switch the way slightly that they use those exact same words, the me and the me. Also take note of the fact that piacere and gustar are two very different words. So in a lot of ways, Spanish and Italian also do have very unique aspects to them. It's not like they're the same language with just a couple different sounds. So why do I go into this? In your fantasy story, if you have two places that used to be one back in the day, maybe they have bad blood now, you can use their language, their linguistics, as a way to highlight both their similarities and their differences and add depth and nuance to both sides. It shows their history and their relation to each other. Now, French also comes from Latin, but I would argue it's nothing like the other two. As a matter of fact, I think that if you didn't know it, it's, you'd be reasonably likely to notice that they're related, but you'd also be reasonably likely to not notice that they're related. Why is that? Well, when it came to the Roman Empire, Italy was an absolutely core part. Spain, for a long time, I would also consider to be a core part of Rome. Not as important as Italy or Greece, right? But they were also part of the Roman Empire for way longer, like hundreds of years longer. The French region, like what is modern day France, wasn't actually part of the Roman Empire until Julius Caesar conquered that region. It was Gaul back in the day, and it was Celtic. That is, I don't know if you're very familiar with history, but if you are, the last Celtic warlord, he kind of, he was all holed up and everything. I believe the story goes Julius Caesar and his men built a wall around him to siege it. And then when his reinforcements were coming along, Julius Caesar and his men built a second outside wall so that the 10th Legion, Caesar's army, could hide in the safety of the wall as they were sieging the Celtics. Sounds fake, but it's real history. Again, the French region, one of the last places to become part of the Roman Empire, they were quite different culturally, and their language was quite different, their initial language. They also really didn't like being part of the Roman Empire, to my understanding, and they were pretty proud of their history. To my understanding, it is theorized that they intentionally spoke Latin poorly and pronounced it badly to begin with, and that's why a base was set up for them to be so different than the other languages. Couple that with the fact that France was never really a core region of Rome, and when the Holy Roman Empire came, which was basically like a German and Frankish empire, the Frankish people become the French. The French were a core part of the Holy Roman Empire. That history really influenced them for centuries. That's another thing that alters it, right? Italy was partially involved in the Holy Roman Empire, partially not. Spain was not really in any capacity. So that history is what makes it so different. Now, that may seem like it was just a big tangent, but circling back, applying it to fantasy, what if you have a multi-book series, or if you have multiple books that take place in different eras of the same place? You can implement some of these changes to show how it evolves, how it alters, and add a lot of depth that wouldn't exist otherwise. Cultures do change over time, and that is a very good way to highlight it. Now, that's all I have for today. So as always, if you have any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comment section below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.